when the wind howled across the empty plains of Montana. The sound could almost break a man's spirit. Some nights it sounded like crying. Other nights like laughter, cruel and hollow. But on one particular evening, as the storm clouds rolled heavy over the horizon, a knock came on the door of a lonely ranch house. And that knock changed 2 lives forever. Jedediah Turner, everyone called him Jed, was a man carved out of silence. At 38, he'd lived most of his life on the ranch his father left behind, miles from town, miles from neighbors, miles from warmth. His days were filled with the grunt of cattle, the creak of saddle leather, and the whistle of cold wind. Since the loss of his wife 5 winters ago, he had spoken more to the animals than to people. He liked it that way. Or so he told himself. But that night, as the storm swept in, the knock at his door startled him. He opened it to find a woman standing there. Her face pale, her clothes soaked through, her eyes wide with something he recognized: desperation. She clutched a small suitcase like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please. I have nowhere else to go." Her name was Clara Mayfield, and her story unfolded in halting breaths over the crackle of the fire he'd lit to warm her. She had come west as a mail-order bride, promised to a man who owned land near the river. But when she arrived, she discovered the man had missold her. He was cruel, twice her age, and had no intention of giving her the life he described in letters. She ran, her heart pounding, carrying nothing but her suitcase and her hope for freedom. But out on those wild Montana roads, freedom came at the cost of hunger, fear, and cold. She had wandered until her legs could take no more. And then, by God's grace, she said, she found his ranch light burning in the dark. Jed wasn't a man who welcomed strangers, especially women with broken hearts and broken promises. But there was something in Clara's eyes that echoed the emptiness in his own. He saw loneliness there, sharp as his own, and he couldn't turn her away. So he gave her food, dry clothes from a trunk, and a cot by the fire. That night neither of them slept much. Clara listened to the wind shake the shutters, wondering what would become of her come morning. Jed sat at the table, staring at his calloused hands, wondering why the presence of a stranger had made his house feel less empty for the first time in years. Days passed, and what began as one night stretched longer. Clara tried to leave once, insisting she couldn't burden him. But the storm had washed out the road, and Jed simply said, "You'll freeze out there." "Stay." She stayed. She cooked in his kitchen, her laughter awkward but soft, filling spaces that had long sat in silence. She helped in the barn, clumsy at first, but her determination stirred something in Jed he thought was long-buried admiration. But life is never simple on the plains. One evening, word came from town. Clara's so-called fiancé was furious she had run. He had influence, money, and friends in the sheriff's office. He threatened to have her dragged back under claims of debt, saying he'd spent good money bringing her west. Clara wept, afraid she'd lose the fragile freedom she had found. Jed felt something ignite in him. Anger, fierce and protective. He had lost his wife once to fate. He would not lose Clara to cruelty. The next morning, Jed saddled his horse and rode to town. He wasn't much for words, but when he stood in front of the sheriff and that bitter old man, his voice carried a weight that made even hardened men listen. "This woman owes you nothing," Jed growled. "She's not a parcel you paid postage on. She's free. And if you try to take her, you'll have to come through me. And I don't back down." There was something in Jed's eyes, the same fire that had kept him alive through storms and loss, that made the sheriff think twice. The old man spat, cursed, but in the end, he left with nothing but his pride bruised. Clara was safe. That night, back at the ranch, Clara stood at the window, watching the moonlight silver the fields. She turned to Jed, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me more than shelter, you gave me back my life." Jed, a man of few words, only nodded. But inside, he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble. For years, he thought he had nothing left to give, no reason to open his heart again. But Clara had shown him that even in the loneliest places, love could find its way. Weeks became months, and what began as a chance encounter turned into something deeper. They rebuilt their lives together. 2 souls once lost, now bound by the storm that had brought them to the same door. The ranch no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it rang with laughter, with the clatter of dishes shared between two, with the soft promises of a future neither had expected but both had prayed for. And so, the man who had sworn to live in silence, and the woman who once whispered, I have nowhere else to go. Discovered that sometimes when you have nowhere else, you find exactly where you belong. The message: no matter how broken, no matter how alone, love has a way of finding the doors that need knocking on.